who are logging in to join us this evening. We ask that you please mute your microphone so we don't pick up any background noise and allow us to hear the presentation. We will be starting shortly, and those of you, I see we have someone on the phone, if you can mute your phone line as well. We will be taking questions later in the meeting, and we'll start to unmute and request those. So again, thank you for logging in. We'll start our meeting in just a couple minutes.
The new secret finding that school shootings are preventable.
Okay. Please, if you're just joining us, please mute your microphone. We're picking up a little bit of background noise. Thank you very much. We'll all try to adjust to our online methods. And for the moment, it looks like we're getting a few more people coming in. Thank you everyone for logging in. Looks like we just got a few more people here right at the start time. So in just another moment or two, we'll start our meeting. Those of you who are joining us, please mute your microphone so we don't pick up any background noise. And we'll be unmuting those when it comes time for our questions and answers. Okay, so I think it's about time. I think we'll go ahead and start our meeting. If we could have our first slide up, please. Okay. Yes, so we're looking for our welcome slide that will tee us up and get us started, because that's a message I want to start with.
Actually, that's the first one, Jim.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and say welcome here. Our presentation is starting. And welcome very much and good evening. If you could move to the next slide. Thank you all for joining us. This is the Pima County Regional Flood Control District's Brawley Watershed Plan virtual public scoping meeting. Welcome, I'm Jan Gordley. I'm a part of the consultant team helping with this study. I wanted to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and that will be posted on the project website for those who aren't able to attend this evening, or if you want to review it later. So I thank you for your participation. I don't see any others waiting in the waiting room or any elected officials at the moment. So with that, we'll proceed and go to our next slide.
Bienvenidos. Si desean traducción en español, por favor, llame al número 520-222-1111, ID 4624. Next slide, please. Non-discrimination policy statement. The Pima County Regional Flood Control District is committed to ensuring that no person is discriminated against on the grounds of color, race, or national origin as provided by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and related legislation. Specifically, Title VI asserts that no person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Additional protections are provided in other federal and state statutes for religion, sex, disability, and age. Next slide, please. The Pima County Regional Flood Control District strives to ensure non-discrimination in all of its programs and activities, whether those programs or activities are federally funded or not. As a sub-recipient of federal funding, the Pima County Regional Flood Control District is responsible for initiating and monitoring Title VI activities, preparing required reports, and other responsibilities as required by the U.S. Department of Justice. Next slide, please.
Okay, so now we'd like to share some of our virtual meeting tips. And that starts with please muting your microphones until we get to requesting or having our questions and answers. So please stay muted. We want to be able to hear the presentation and hear others as we speak. There'll be plenty of time at the end, over an hour, for questions and answers, so your turn is coming. For those of you joining us online, you will be able to ask questions by using the chat function. You should be able to see that on your screen at the top in the little talk bubble icon. You click on that and then type your question or comment into the chat that you should be able to see to the right of your screen. You can do that at any time. We'll read those when we get to our question and comment portion. Also, if you'd like to be added to future email updates for this study, we'd really encourage you to add your name and your email address in the chat box. We'll add you to our list to receive future notifications via email. Another way to comment is to use the raised hand icon. That's also at the top of your screen. You can hover over that and click it to indicate that you would like to speak. And then when we are in that session and ready to take questions and answers, we'll call on you. For those of you on the phone, we will be calling for questions and comments from callers on the phone during the question and answer session, and we'll call on you. For all of you that do speak or add a comment, please identify yourself when you do comment or ask a question. We do thank you for waiting until we complete the presentation before you speak or make a comment. We want to get through of all that and then devote some time to your input. In addition to your involvement at this evening's meeting, we want to provide a number of ways that you can participate throughout this study, and we really encourage you to do that. That's very important. We'll provide those specifics a little later in the meeting. We really encourage and welcome your comments using any of those methods for the team's attention and consideration. However, I do want to let you know that if you would like your comments, additional comments beyond this evening's meeting, to be included in the summary of this initial public scoping phase where we're gathering your input and information, please provide any additional comments by the end of April to be included in that summary report. Of course, we always would like to have your input and comments, but that will just make it a part of the scoping summary report and conclude that period. Next slide. So our agenda this evening, it includes some brief introductions next. That will be followed by the presentations about the study, and then there will be about an hour for your questions and comments. So with that, we'll go to the next slide and our introduction, starting with Evan.
Yeah, hi. My name is Evan Canfield. I'm so happy you are willing to join us tonight. I'm the project manager for the Pima County Regional Flood Control District, the local sponsoring organization, and I'm joined here tonight by Eleonora DeMaria.
Hello, I'm Alicia Phipps from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or the NRCS. We're the lead federal agency, and I'm the assigned lead conservation planner for this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. This is Bob Eichinger. I am a project manager for the consulting team for Stantec Consulting Services. I am joined tonight by Joe Allen, who is our project technical lead. Both Joe and I will have presentations as part of our presentation tonight, but also joining us on the line, but not having a presentation role, is Tim Sweeney, who is our programs compliance coordinator. Also part of our consulting team, if you've heard from Jan Gordley already, is the Gordley Group. Phil Burdick, you will hear from him later in our presentation, and he is the public involvement manager. And tonight's moderator is Jan Gordley. Also on the line, but not presenting tonight, are two other of my subconsultants, SWCA and Wilder Landscape Architects. SWCA is led by Teresa Knobloch, and they are our environmental lead for this project. And then Jennifer Patton from Wilder Landscape Architects. They will be responsible for the landscape measures on the project, as well as evaluating the invasive species issues throughout the study area. Next slide, please. So I will continue on with describing what is the purpose of tonight's meeting, what is tonight's purpose of the public scoping focus. But we wanted to get the public input for issues and concerns within the project study area, and you'll see a map shortly here of what that project study area is. We'll share with you what the project is from an overview perspective. We would want to obtain the public input during this scoping period, as Jan has indicated earlier. We want to help get identification with the public input through the study area of important natural and community resources that could be or should be considered as part of the study area and its ecosystems framework. We want to solicit your questions about possible effects on the ecosystem, both in the natural environment and the built environment. Next slide, please. We do want to encourage, as it's been indicated earlier, to have the public involvement throughout the project and project scoping process. We do ask for your input on many concerns throughout the watershed from an ecosystem perspective, including these issues and concerns and resources, but not limited to these, which include flooding and erosion, water resources, agricultural issues, cultural resources, wildlife, and invasive species. Next slide, please. As part of our watershed plan environmental assessment and our public scoping process, we will be obtaining the public and agency and stakeholder input throughout, as we mentioned, through the scoping and comment periods. We have developed a draft purpose and needs statement, which you'll hear Evan discuss that here shortly. As part of our watershed plan EA, we'll be developing a watershed study and formulating alternatives to address any of these concerns and issues and objectives and opportunities in our watershed study area. The evaluation and formulation of these alternatives will also consider and identify any environmental impacts. Next slide, please. The Watershed Plan EA will also conduct what's called a benefits and cost of the alternatives. How much is the particular alternative cost and what benefits will that particular alternative bring? We'll be evaluating also what is called a no action alternative as part of our assessment. Throughout The Plan EA will be taking a look at the alternatives and evaluating whether or not any mitigation from an environmental perspective is required for addressing any of the resources of concern that we have identified earlier. And as we move through the development of our plan and environmental assessment, we'll be making decisions and selecting a preferred alternative. And that preferred alternative will be developed into the Watershed Plan EA for review and approval by the public and by the client, Pima County Regional Flood Control District, and the NRCS. Now, once this Plan EA is approved and completed, the Plan EA does provide a path, or can provide a path, to fund any of the design and construction of the preferred alternative or preferred solution for the project watershed. Next slides, please. So I'll turn the presentation over to Alicia Phipps, who will talk about where this project is located.
Thank you, Bob. So my name is Alicia Phipps from the NRCS. Next slide, please. So the Brawley Wash is located to the west of Tucson on the west side of the Tucson Mountains. The southern end of the watershed starts approximately 8 miles south of 3 Points and extends through Avra Valley and Marana up to Pinal County. The watershed covers 198,000 acres and is approximately 40 miles long, and at its widest point is about 20 miles wide. The project area covers multiple land jurisdictions, parcels of land owned by the City of Tucson and Pima County, BLM and state lands, lands of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the Pasquayaqui tribe, as well as part of the Saguaro National Park West. As you can see, this is going to be a large plan due to the scale of the watershed and the complex lands it covers. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, the partners on this plan are the Pima County Flood Control District as the local sponsoring organization. The lead federal agency is the NRCS, part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the consultants on this plan include Stantec, the Gordley Group, SWCA, and the Wilder Landscape Architects. This coordinated effort is in accordance with the NRCS Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program, which helps units of government protect and restore watersheds up to 250,000 acres in size. The program provides for cooperation between the federal government and local governments to work together to prevent erosion, floodwater, and sediment damage, and to further conservation efforts in the watershed. The outcome of this coordination is to develop a watershed plan, environmental assessment, or a Plan EA. This is in accordance with Public Law 83-566, which is the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Act. This law authorizes the NRCS to help local organizations implement watershed projects. Next slide, please. This plan will be developed in accordance with the National Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA. Part of the planning process is to develop alternatives to address the identified concerns in the area. And as Bob mentioned, the preferred alternative will be selected and evaluated to assess its costs and benefits, as well as the environmental impacts of the project. And the next step in the process will be the review of the Plan EA and comment period at the local level. And once comments have been addressed, the plan will be submitted for review and approval at the state and national levels. An approved watershed plan must be in place prior to initiation of any corrective land treatment or structural solutions. Next slide, please. So here is the project timeline. We are still in the data collection stages and identifying areas of concern. We will be holding another public meeting in the future to present the draft plan with the preferred alternative. So if you give us your contact information, we can notify you of the future meetings. And at this time, the tentative completion date for the Plan EA is August 2022. Next slide, please. I will now turn the presentation over to Evan Canfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia and Bob. About 20 years ago, I was an engineer for NRCS working on one of these watershed protection and flood prevention programs. So I am especially gratified that we've been selected for this project. Next slide. So in formulating these, we have to pick one of 8 eligible purposes under the watershed protection and flood prevention programs. And we were advised by NRCS to focus on one or two. And so we selected the flood prevention purpose. So let's go through what that means in this case. So the purpose of this watershed project is to control stormwater sheet flood, reduce potential damages to private property, reduce potential damages to agricultural land, and reduce potential damages to public infrastructure. So that's the purpose. And then let's talk about the need. Next slide, please. So we say the proposed action is needed because currently the natural drainage patterns in the Brawley Wash watersheds have been altered and need to be restored because they are adversely impacting hydrologic function of the watershed, endangering residential properties, agricultural properties, and critical public infrastructure. And with that, I would point out that even though we're focusing on flood prevention, the watershed plan will be broader in our vision. So you'll hear in a little bit, Phil from Gordley is going to show you our online data collection tool, and it will talk about things like wildlife and invasive species. And with that, next slide. So turn around to Bob.
Thank you, Evan. Your planning team, consisting of Pima County Regional Flood Control District, the NRCS, and the consulting team, have had an opportunity here about 2-3 weeks ago to go out in the field and take a tour of the watershed, look at the existing conditions out there, look for potential concerns and issues that the watershed and your tributaries and washes are currently experiencing. So we've prepared a number of slides here that give us a little watershed fly around that will present to you what these typical issues look like. Next slide. What this slide demonstrates is an aerial view that shows the project watershed outlined in red. And you can see within the red area, there's a number of blue areas which represent the current federal emergency management mapped floodplains. And there is a considerable amount of land areas within our project area that are mapped with these floodplains. Part of our project will be to evaluate the potential flooding within the project watershed and potentially mitigate or come up with some mitigation measures to reduce or alleviate any flooding issues. Next slide, please. As part of our field visit from our planning team, we have prepared a number of location slides here within our watershed, 4 of them exactly, and the graphic on the left shows you the indication of where I'm going to present specific issues within the watershed, and then one just slightly outside our watershed, but is very closely related to the issues that are found within the problems within our watershed. The examples of concerns and issues, and I'm sure some of the public out there have seen these in real life, which also includes sheet flow flooding, which is shallow overland flooding of widespread but very shallow depths. A number of your tributaries in Brawley Wash are experiencing sedimentation and erosion of banks. There has been diversion of historic drainage flow paths within the project study area. There is also areas that have poor vegetated ground cover, and as a result of that, the potential is there for invasive plant species to come in and overtake those areas with poor vegetated ground cover. Now I'm going to have next couple of slides, we'll go through each one of these 4 areas that will show you and illustrate these concerns from an area to area basis. Next slide, we'll go to area 1. Area 1 is referred to as King 98, and you'll see that area on the left side of the graphic. This is located just south of Ajo Highway, and this area exhibits a lack of natural vegetation. There's very little ground cover, as you can see on the bottom graphics, and also has abandoned agricultural irrigation structures. They're not maintained and they're actually falling apart. These agricultural structures are diverting the natural flow path pattern out in this area. And Pima County has initiated measures to restore the patterns in this region. Next slide, please. The next slide takes us to Area 2, which is Snyder Hill Road. This is just located outside of our area, but demonstrates some of the effects that an agricultural berm and a roadway may have on capturing flows and diverting those from their natural flow paths. Joe will be talking a little bit more about Snyder Hill Road shortly. But this is located just west of Sandario Road, located along the southern edge of the Tucson Groundwater Recharge Project, known as SAF-SARP. There's a diversion of the natural flow path due to an agricultural berm, and as well as a drainage conflict at the road. And you can see the bottom photograph shows ponding of a recent storm at the roadway crossing. Tucson Water is currently planning an improvement project in this area, as well as removal of that berm and reestablishing historic flow patterns. Next slide, please. Area 3 takes us up to Mile Wide Road. You can see where that photo location is taken in the left graphic, and that is located just west of Sandario Road and north of the Tucson groundwater recharge basin known as CAV-SARP. This area exhibits poor surface cover and vegetation, and there is erosion of the channel banks and head cutting, and there's graphics shown on the lower right that shows the head cutting of a local tributary. And then there's an existing diversion berm, which is shown in the middle photograph, that captures the natural drainage flow path and diverts it into a different direction. Next slide, please. Area 4 takes us up to Manville Road, which is located near Reservation Road. This area also exhibits abandoned agricultural structures, which in turn is diverting or relocating historic flow paths. This area also exhibits a poor surface cover vegetation, which opens it up to potential invasions of non-native species to take over the ground cover in these areas. Next slide, please. So I will turn the conversation over to Joe, who will talk about the issue specifically at Snyder Hill Road.
Thanks, Bob. Good evening, everybody. So as Bob mentioned, this is the Snyder Hill Road project that we recently performed for Tucson Water with direct coordination from the Pima County Regional Flood Control District. This road over here is Sandario Road, and about 3 miles north of Ajo Highway, this is Snyder Hill Road right here. To the north of Snyder Hill Road is an abandoned agricultural field that dates back to before the 1950s. At least that's how far aerial photographs date for this area. And now it's owned by Tucson Water, and this is the South Afro Valley Surface Area Recharge Project. I hope I got that right. It's a complex acronym. And south of Snyder Hill Road is a natural area that's been developing over time. A lot of these homes have been built since the mid-1970s. The pretty lines that you see here, the colors, represent what happens when a typical storm moves through this area. Flow, as in most places in the Brawley, moves from south to north, and the colors represent the maximum depth of water for this particular event. Green, in this case, is flows less than 1/2 foot. Blue is 1/2 foot to 1 foot. Yellow is 1 to 2 feet. Orange, as near the intersection here, is between 2 and 3 feet. And finally, red, as it occurs in a couple areas, are flow depths greater than 3 feet. You may notice that the flow paths are kind of broad and a little bit squirrely, and they pretty much stop at Snyder Hill Road. The reason for that, there's an abandoned agricultural embankment out there that evidently was used to divert water away from washing out the fields long ago. So water now heads to the south across Sandario Road, and the flow depths are quite deep. You may also notice there's a couple of features in here of narrow, deep water that, as it turns out, is water running along the roads. Anybody that's been in a rural area, if it rains, roads tend to act more like channels than they do roads at the time. So this is a typical situation in these rural environments. So to resolve this and to try and restore the natural flow paths in the area, the solution was to remove this berm, regrade Snyder Hill Road, and to find a way to increase the flow to reestablish this historic flow path. Well, we just completed the study, and the results of that will be shown in the next slide. So as we can see, most of the deep potential water against the road has gone away. There's a little bit left over Sandario, but for the most part, the regional flow paths have been reestablished. Flow is now moving through the middle of the area. It's difficult to reestablish a historic flow path because in some areas we don't have anything to fall back on. So this is a much more improved situation. But what this project demonstrates is there's a number of issues, not only for Snyder Hill Road, but we see throughout the watershed. And there are a number of solutions that can be applied to mitigate this and to restore historic flow paths. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Bob.
Thank you, Joe. We've had the opportunity to obtain several videos of example flooding within the project study area. This is currently showing the flooding video of local flooding along Bop Road, west of the groundwater recharge project, SAPSARP, in 2019. As you can see, this is pretty much typical of what you would see from a rainstorm event within the project study area. Pretty wide, shallow flood flow with water carrying a good amount of sediment. Next video, please. This is also another example of local flooding within our project watershed. This one we had the opportunity where the videographer was able to capture the flooding front as it was moving through this particular parcel. Again, pretty wide, shallow flooding, and in some cases makes access to properties temporarily inaccessible, and can leave behind a bit of sediment and mud and muck to have to maintain and get out of the private properties. Next slide, please, or next video. This one shows a typical tributary. It's not particularly in our study watershed, but is a good case example of what does occur within our watershed on small tributaries. They respond to a rainfall event by carrying the runoff. And the runoff you can see here is very dark colored, carrying a good amount of sediment. And from evidence of looking at this video that the flow actually did get outside of this little tributary and up into the little vegetated areas. So very typical examples of stream flows and washes in action within the project area. And we'll be taking a look at evaluating these types of flooding issues within our project watershed study. Next slide, please. So I'll turn our presentation over to Phil Burdick, who will be talking about our public input for this project.
Thank you, Bob, and good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Burdick. I'm the Public Involvement Manager for Gordley Group, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. Go to the next slide, please. So one of the main purposes of a public scoping meeting is to get input, and we really, again, appreciate you taking the time to join us here tonight, and we request that you also talk to your friends and neighbors, people who might be interested in this project, because there's lots of ways to give us input into the project and to give your thoughts directly to the project team. You can talk to us. You can call Pima County Regional Flood Control District at area code 520-724-4600. You can also go to the project website, and I know most of you can see this, but for the people on the phone, it's tiny, TINYURL.com/S5 M like Mary VAPX2. We also have an interactive website, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. That interactive website, the web address is www.brawleywashplan.com, and Brawley Wash is spelled BRAWLEY Wash plan.com. A lot of people leave off that E off the end of Brawley, but it's Brawley with an E. You can also email the project manager directly at Evan, E-V-A-N, .Canfield, C-A-N-F-I-E-L-D, at pima.gov. You can also mail Evan at Evan Canfield, Project Manager, Pima County Regional Flood Control District, 201 North Stone Avenue, 9th floor, Tucson, Arizona, 85701. Next slide, please. So we've developed an interactive map to make it easier and I think more efficient for people to leave comments, specifically within the project study area. So if you go to www.brawleywashplan.com, again, it's Brawley with an E, it will take you to sort of a cover page, and it will lead you to the interactive map. And what you want to do then is click on to the blue button showed by the red arrow, and it will take you to the project map where you can make comments. Next slide. So once you go to that, you'll see kind of a wide shot of the area with the project study area outlined in red. You can feel free to make comments even outside those red areas. That would certainly work. We want comments not only in the area, but also in nearby areas as well. Next slide. I'm going to show you this live in just a moment, but just sort of as background. There are 5 pins, as it were, for specific problems: flooding, erosion, wildlife, invasive species, and any other issues or concerns. And what you simply do is go up to the pin, click it, and then drag it down to the area where there's a concern or a question. Next slide. Then once you click it into that area, a box will open, and then you can write your comment in that box. We don't require a name, though we'd love to have it, and or an address. We do require an email, however. That way, if there are questions or issues, there's a way that folks can get back in touch with you. One of the nice features about this, and you'll see it in just a moment, is that not only can you leave comments in the comment box, but you can also upload pictures. And this is especially important with this type of project, where I think pictures can really tell a great story, as well as a person's description of the issues or areas of concern. Next slide. So there you will actually see someone who's made a comment with a picture, and this is kind of what it looks like. So people can view what the comment is, if there's a picture. Just FYI, it might take a little while to upload the picture. You won't see it right away. The pictures kind of go through a filter to make sure there's nothing inappropriate in the picture. But they will appear, they won't appear instantaneously, but they should appear within an hour or so. Next slide. Another great feature about this tool is that it allows other people to see comments and also see, what other people are commenting about. You can like or dislike comments, and it can really get people to engage in a great community discussion online about the issues, areas of concern within the project area. So it's an ongoing conversation with the community, and these comments and discussions are captured and they're put into the record. So it really makes commenting easy. It kind of gives great context to what you're commenting about, and it also allows us to capture these comments for the entire scoping plan. And so I'm going to, at this point, just request control of this, and I'm going to go to this tool live and kind of show you how it works. So if I'm seated control.
I've unshared and you can share.
All right, can everyone see my screen?
It looks good.
All right. So when you click on brawleywashplan.com, this is the first screen that you'll see. It's kind of an introductory screen. You'll see the interactive map. So all you do is click this blue button. That's the will take you to the project map. There'll be a list. This is kind of the directions on how to do things. You can click off of that and go right to the commenting area. So then you can zoom in on a particular area of concern. One great feature about this map is that in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see sort of this layer icon. And right now I'm on the terrain view, which kind of gives you a good view of the map and location, but you can also click into a satellite view. And that way you can zoom in a lot closer into particular areas of concern. And it allows you to zoom actually pretty far into the project area. And then what you will do then, if there's an issue with erosion, simply click on this pin, open it up, and your comment box comes up. Again, we do require an email address. We'd like you to put in your name, a phone number, zip code, but it's not required. And then simply, if you want to attach something, you click on the camera icon and you can attach pictures and then add comments to it. Again, those pictures won't come up right away. They have to be screened first, but they should come up shortly after they are uploaded. And then again, to the left is the activity button where you can then see there's already activity on this. There's already good conversations going, which is great. We highly encourage people to get involved, like, dislike comments, comment on each other's comments, and just have a good community dialogue about issues and concerns within the Brawley Wash. Go ahead, Joe, and you can take back control. And you can go to the next slide.
Okay, let me get to it.
Okay, at this point, we're happy to entertain a question. So if you do have questions, please use the chat box with clicking the icon on the top, the dialog bubble, and we will get to your questions both through chat. If you want to speak, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. And for those on the phone, we will get to your questions as well. Jan, any other further thoughts?
No, I just want to thank our speakers. They've provided information about the purpose and need and what the study entails. And this is what you've heard. I think all the speakers mentioned it's very important that we need to hear your input. I think the next slide may show those tips again for the chat. If we could go to the next slide, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, there we are. Yeah. Please continue to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. We want to be able to hear the answers and the speakers. It looks like we are starting to get some comments in the chat. Thank you very much. And use the hand icon. And again, those on the phone will ask specifically for you to speak up and give us your comments. When you do, please identify yourself. So I think with that, we're ready now to go ahead and start to respond to some of our questions. Phil, you want to take our first chat comment?
Sure, and this first question is a great question. Looks like from Jonathan Goldman. He asks, is it worth letting attendees know how people without internet access are being advised of the EA and how their comments can be facilitated? Yes, that's an excellent question, especially because this project is in such mostly contained within a rural area. So in addition to meetings like this, we've also handed out flyers to different areas, mostly around 3 Points, Picture Rocks, and Avra Valley. We've also advertised in local newspapers there. In addition, we've also reached out to the next door communities there to let them know what's happening. So people without internet access, if they do have questions or comments, and we'll repeat this slide again, can call the Pima County Regional Flood Control District directly. They can also, thank you, they can also write to Evan, and there will also be field visits as well to reach out to people. So there's lots of ways to reach out, but it's a good question because in the internet age, it's always challenging and important to think about people who don't have internet, and there are communities that don't have great internet connections or are not online. So thank you for that question. To the next question, let me just go right up to this chat here. Has there been any research done on permaculture methods for capturing water? I'll turn that over to Evan, and he can turn it over to anyone else. Evan?
Yeah, so what I would say about that is there's a guy named Bill Zedike who's been very active in the Altar Valley, and the Altar Valley Conservation Alliance has been they were in on the selection team and the scoping for this project. So they've done a lot of work with things like One Rock dams, implemented a lot of work up there. We've also worked with Mary Nichols, who works for the USDA Agricultural Research Service and actually has quantified the effects of things like check dams. So it's certainly within our wheelhouse. I think I want to turn this over maybe to somebody from NRCS, because I feel like these permaculture practices exist within the NRCS standard practices, but they have like different names. So I don't know if Alicia or somebody, Alicia, yeah, do you have any thoughts on those?
Yes, NRCS has many practices that probably could be tied in as permaculture methods, or using natural products and natural methods to promote the land and promote the natural resources within it. So we have a collection of, we call them practices, but they're projects that do tie together and kind of promote creating microclimates within a site. Like maybe in one of Bob's first pictures, he showed a study site where we're using natural material to help increase organic matter, and also by bringing in more native seed to try and get some vegetation established on these sites. So we're definitely working on that, but also we're not afraid to get more information, or if people have literature for this desert landscape, specifically the Sonora Desert. If you could share that with us, that would be great.
Thank you for that answer. We have another question in our chat. There are several Facebook groups on water conservation methods with experts available to teach. What resources are available to this project for building on the knowledge of these experts? And I'll turn that over to Evan again.
Well, I'd like to think that we do have experts. I mean, this is what Bob is hired to do. And what I would say is certainly the methods of people like Brad Lancaster are synergistic with the way that I think NRCS approaches landscape level projects. I'm not sure if that's what you had in mind. I also want to take an opportunity to thank our stakeholders. I see Christina and Jonathan as a stakeholder in our larger stakeholder group. So I want to thank them for showing up. And sorry, I guess that was a little off topic, but I did want to say thank you to those guys.
Thank you, Evan. We have one more question, and then if you're on the phone, I will call out to the people waiting on the phone to answer a question. But we do have a question in chat from D. Moore, and the question is, I came late, so sorry if this has already been answered. That's no problem. Is this area recognized as a floodplain for flood insurance purposes? I'm in Picture Rocks.
Well, and I guess that's me again. I think Terry is he's on here too, and knows this stuff. But yeah, so there's local floodplains and FEMA floodplains, and there's certainly lots of floodplains out here. And I know that Picture Rocks has historically had, floodplain problems. I'm not sure exactly where you're talking about in Picture Rocks and whether that's a FEMA floodplain or not. It's certainly recognized as a floodplain, and then the question is it floodplain for insurance purposes? Well, it sort of depends on where you are. If you're in the blue on this map, it is certain you certainly are currently recognized. I wasn't going to get into this, but we actually have a parallel effort going on now to improve our mapping of this FEMA floodplain, and so yeah. But certainly the FEMA floodplains are the ones that are recognized for insurance purposes.
Great, thank you, Evan. We do have a couple more questions here. This one.
And Terry just did pipe up, and he's the project manager for that. Is it possible to unmute Terry and have him speak about the status of that, the floodplain mapping?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hear you now.
Yes, we can.
Okay. There is a separate grant project to remap the Brawley and Blackwash watersheds, the main water courses. The remapping will not cover the tributary sheet flow like you might see in Picture Rocks area. There is some separate local mapping for that. The grant project just started. It's going to be a long and involved project. There will be a website created when more information is available, but we're just new on the scene. And so if you go to the Pima County Flood Control website, if you type in the word Brawley, you'll get both Evan's link to this project, and you'll also see when I developed the website for the FEMA mapping project.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And in the chat, Jonathan, thank you for that. There is a link for people with internet access to evaluate their current flood insurance rate map status. Jonathan, thank you for that link, and that will be captured in this presentation. Here's a question in chat, and after this question, I'm going to go to folks on the phone. So if you're hanging on the phone and have a question, I'm going to get to you next. This is from David Gebert. Please state or restate the mission or goal of this plan. I will turn to Evan for that.
Yeah, I think the best way I can do this, David, is probably just show the two slides that we had on the purpose and need. So, whether it's a mission or goal, under the guidelines that we're using with the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program, the language is purpose and need. So the purpose of this plan is to control stormwater sheet flood, reduce potential damages to private property, reduce potential damages to agricultural land, and reduce potential damages to public infrastructure. So I think, I'll call that the goal. With the language we are using in this project, we're calling it purpose. And hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, you can also go through the project need as well, Evan.
Yeah, so we say it's needed because the natural drainage patterns in the Brawley Wash have been altered and need to be restored because they are adversely impacting hydrologic function of the watershed, endangering residential properties, endangering agricultural properties, and endangering critical infrastructure. So that's really the focus of it. But what I would say is floodplain function and watershed function are integrally related concepts. And so, to reduce flooding, improved watershed function and floodplain function help, absorb the water. So hopefully that's adequate. if not, feel free to email me and we can continue this discussion further.
Thank you, Evan. Let me turn to people on the phones. If you have been calling in, or if you did call in and you're waiting to ask a question, now's a great time to do that. So any callers on the line have a question for the project team? All right, I'm hearing none. So let me just continue with the questions. And if you do have additional questions, please use chat. We do have some frequently asked questions that we do want to get to for people. And I think these are questions that people who might not want to speak up in a virtual meeting might have. And this is directed to anyone on the project team. Can you please explain both the possible conflicts between environmental aspects to this project and flood control? Sometimes they work together, sometimes they're opposed to each other. Can you explain some of the challenges of planning around both of these forces and issues?
Yeah, Phil, this is Bob Eichinger with Stantec, and I think I'll just jump in and initiate the conversation and then see if Evan wanted to also supplement my response. Yes, typically when we develop alternatives, you look at various measures of the viability of that alternative, both on environmental aspects, but economics, the benefits of that alternative, and the implementation schedule and construction. The environmental aspects, particularly in this area, there is some environmental sensitivity. And if we develop floodplain mitigation measures, they typically are, some of them are hard structural measures that can impact an environmental corridor. But all of these potential effects of an alternative will be evaluated and taken into consideration of the viability of a particular floodplain or a flood mitigation measure. Evan, do you want to add anything to that, or Alicia?
Yeah, go ahead. I guess I would say there are a couple of things. A lot of this land is public land, not particularly slated for the land itself to be redeveloped for development. In fact, it's more prized for the habitat conservation plan the city has and the multi-species conservation plan that the county has. So we have a need to address the environmental concerns by open land, preserving as open land, and to the extent possible, actually improving the habitat. And as I was describing earlier, we anticipate that actually will reduce downstream flooding. Now, locally, there may be one or another, concern about erosion or flooding that we may look at structural measures. But yeah, people should recognize we also have a need to preserve habitat and improve. It's a Plan EA, not a developer's plan to plop houses. So, Alicia, did you have anything more to add?
Just that people could be rest assured that that is the intent of the plan, is to fully assess, action versus no action. So part of our NEPA compliance will be assessing if we did not take any action, what would be the long-term effect on that site, versus if we do implement the proposed alternative for that specific project, for that specific site, what would the impacts be, whether negative or positive. So everything that's looked at is going to be assessed. The impacts on it will be assessed and documented, whether it's positive or potentially negative impacts. So that's going to be thoroughly reviewed for each area and project site.
Thank you. We do have another question in chat. I lost my connection during this portion of the presentation, always a problem in the virtual world. Joe, can you repeat efforts to alleviate flooding on Snyder Hill Road, please.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the plan that we've recommended to Tucson Water in this location and with approval from the flood control district is to remove the existing agricultural berm between Terra Lane and Sandario Road. That allow flow to make it across the road. What we've done in the case of Snyder Hill Road itself is from just a little bit west of Terra Lane to Sandario Road. We put in a one-way road. If anybody knows when they're driving down the street that typically a road is high in the middle and low on the outside, that's called a crown road. In these type of environments, what happens is when water makes it up over one side, it gets pooled against the upstream side, so you have standing water. Well, we can't have that in these kind of environments, especially with the amount of water that moves across these types of roads. So we've put in a one-way crown so that the southern edge will be higher than the north edge or the left edge if you're going eastbound. So water will move across there. To alleviate the standing water in a number of areas, what we've done in the southeast corner of Snyder Hill Road and Sandario, actually it's the northeast, but the southeast of the Tucson properties, we're going to open up this area that kind of clogs up how drainage moves through the area. So it'll allow it to move freely through Tucson Water and get across Sandario Road. Also near Terra Lane, we're putting what we call a leadoff channel. So the whole point of this is not only just to reestablish flows, but it's to create positive flow patterns to allow water to continually move through the new reconstructed portion of the road. And this will help to minimize any potential ponding in the future. That's the big issue that they face right now is the ponding that we showed in one of the photos. It's continuous in some areas. It hides 3-foot potholes, and we're not talking width, we're talking depth. So that's very dangerous. So Tucson Water's taken a very proactive stance in this to get this road rebuilt correctly. And at the same time, we're handling stream restoration in the area too. So it's a multi-beneficial type of project. And we haven't heard yet when they're slating this to begin. They have final construction improvement plans in hand. It's just a matter of now they need to schedule it. Mike Sanders, the Tucson Water project manager, a great guy to work with. He's a nice guy to talk to, is hoping to do this sometime after monsoon season, but he needs to confirm that with his upper management. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for that answer. Appreciate it. We do have a question in Spanish, and if our translator, Eleonora, is on the line, can you please read the question in Spanish, translate it for us in English, and then we'll have someone answer that question for us.
So,
you might have to
Phil,
mute our microphone. Yes.
Yeah. Phil, I believe Eleonora had to leave the meeting. Are you there? Or
No, I believe,
go ahead.
Yeah, she had to leave the meeting.
Oh, okay.
So that's what her note said is va a haber otra reunión. She had to go. La fecha no está fajita out. So I think she's asking if there was another meeting.
Yeah,
Will there be another meeting?
Will be any more public meetings with further updates as the project moves along, and if you guys have any dates yet.
Thank you, Cara. And that can go to Alicia.
Oh, I was just saying the same thing Kara was saying, but at this time we don't have, we are going to have another public meeting, but we have not set the date yet. So please give us your contact information and we will let everyone know when we'll be holding that next meeting.
Great, thank you. And we do have a question from our frequently asked questions. So are there any thoughts about, at this stage, at the public scoping stage, about costs and how those costs might be paid? And I'll direct that question first to Evan and then to Bob.
Well, we are hopeful that if we identify cost-effective alternatives in this process, we can approach NRCS for at least partial funding. I think as we go, I think this phase of the project, we get substantial support for them for the costs, implementation costs. Should we be fortunate enough to identify cost-effective solutions, we would need to come up with a cost share, and my impression that would be, local government, be largely Pima County Flood Control, Tucson Water, but the cost share. So I don't know, Alicia, if you wanted to say more about the way the funding for implementation, should we be fortunate enough to get it, how that would work.
I'm not as familiar with that end of the project still, but like you said, Evan, you guys can, once this Plan EA has been approved by our National Water Management Center, then we would be eligible to apply for additional funding for the design and then the construction of these projects. So it is a possibility.
Any other comments from the team regarding funding? I would remind people who are still on to please put in your name and contact information in the chat. That way you'll be part of our email database. And when there are updates, other information, other meetings, we can contact you. So please enter your name and contact information into the chat, and that way it's easier for us to get in touch with you. All right, we have another couple of questions from common questions from the frequently asked questions list. Will this work, mitigating flood, improving the environment, help make this land more attractive to developers? And I'm going to start with Evan, and Evan can throw it to whoever he wants. Evan?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this land is public land. So it's certainly not the objective to make it more attractive to developers. What I would say is these habitat conservation plans and multi-species conservation plans, are part of the, mitigating the effects of development and allowing development in places where we are more favorable to it. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful, but this is the purpose and need stated really has more to do with flood and watershed actions than the idea of future development.
Great. Anyone else on the comment? Anyone else on the team want to comment on that particular issue? If not, we have another frequently asked question, which is, what happens if we don't do anything? And I know from your presentation, Evan, that's one of the things that this plan considers. What if we take no action? What are the issues and concerns with that, or the pluses of that?
Yeah, and Bob's been down this path before, helping to prepare these. This is one of the reasons that we've selected him as a consultant. But yeah, I think there's always a no action alternative, and maybe someone from NRCS or Bob can speak to that.
Yeah, Evan, this is Bob Eichinger with Stantec. Yeah, one of the alternatives we'll be evaluating is what's called the future without federal involvement or federal investment. And that's basically defined loosely as a no action. But we identify a future condition, potentially what the future condition of this watershed could be within an appropriate planning period. Let's say it's 50 years. It's not only this project, but we would identify any other planning projects that could be occurring within this project study area or close to this project study area, and take a look at what those projects are envisioning for the project area. we can and will continue to see the issues of concern out here in regards to sedimentation, erosion, continued flooding. And as the watershed hopefully does, where the areas that have poor land cover do recover, whether that's with invasive species or with a natural vegetative habitat, we could see natural restoration of retention of water and maybe some reduction of flows, but that is yet to be seen and is hard to predict. So it is a good question on what this future without project or without the what it could look like in 50, maybe even to 100 years. But without some intervention, you can see what the conditions look like over time. And we do have a mapping consultant on board here that has looked at digital mapping and aerial mapping over time and has shown the progression of erosion and head cuts throughout the watershed, particularly in the southern area of our watershed. And we could continue to see that and would expect to see that continue without some type of intervention. So that would be somewhat defined as the future without federal involvement or the with no action alternative that we would evaluate as part of this project. Any other input, Evan or Alicia?
No, I think you covered it well, Bob.
Hey, Phil.
Great, thank you. And again, please visit www.brawleywashplan, that's Brawley, B-R-A-W-L-E-Y, brawleywashplan.com, and visit our interactive website and pin in your questions, concerns, be part of the dialogue and keep the conversation going. And that way we can capture your comments, questions, and concerns. We do have one other question from the frequently asked questions list. So what are the next steps? This is a scoping planning process. What are the next steps after this? And I'll throw it to Evan, and then he can throw it to either Alicia or Bob.
Yeah, I mean, the first aspect is gathering the data on the watershed, especially as it relates to flooding, erosion, and our hope for restoration. Identify our problems, and then Bob will be involved in helping us select some proposed mitigation strategies, kind of like what Joe showed us for the Snyder Hill Road. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that I'm going to pass it back to your team, Bob. It seems like Tim might be able to help us on the process. I mean, the first part's identifying the problem, coming up with alternatives, and then yeah, we'll look to the experts on how we crunch the alternatives. So Tim, what were you saying?
Okay, this is Tim Sweeney. From the National Watershed Manual in terms of flood prevention purpose, the watershed program funds, I'm just quoting right out of the policy. It says the watershed program funds must provide 100% of the construction and engineering costs for works of improvement for flood damage reduction. No cost sharing is available to acquire land, easements, or rights of way needed in connection with works of improvement for this purpose, except for the acquisition of wetland or floodplain conservation easements discussed further in the policy. But somebody asked a question about cost sharing. So the NRCS, upon approval of the plan, we would pay 100% of construction and engineering.
Thank you, Tim. And I'd like just to supplement that, Tim mentioned that the manual indicates that land and easements are not included, and they would be the cost borne by the sponsoring local organizations, such as Pima County Regional Flood Control or their noted stakeholders.
And I was going to say, Alicia had a really nice slide on the process, at least for the next, through August 2022. And that might be helpful in understanding the ongoing process. But take another look at that.
Is that the timeline? Yeah. And this is just to develop the initial plan. So this would be the plan to figure out the best alternative to take. And then once that is approved and a FONSI's received, then you guys, Pima County Flood Control District, could come back and apply for more funding for the design and construction part. So,
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evan, any other thoughts on this before I go to the next question?
No, thank you, Phil. Thank you, Alicia. Thanks, Bob.
This next question actually comes from the Social Pinpoint site. And if you go to that site, there's actually some great questions on that as well. And we invite people to post questions and get in on the discussion on the Social Pinpoint, www.brawleywashplan.com. Sorry, I keep repeating that, but that's the website to make your voice heard. From the Social Pinpoint site, is the study taking into account, and I know I'm not going to say this correctly, subsidence cracks? Did I say that correctly?
yes. I guess I'll jump in. So yes, I mean, we definitely want to know if there's any subsidence cracks going on in the area. I've worked with some ranches where those are occurring. So if people can get on the map and actually show us where those are occurring, because we may not catch all of them in our studies, that would be great. Because that is another form of erosion, another soils issue that's going on out there. Not sure how we would address it, but we definitely want to know where they are, and then we could look at what we could do to help that or prevent that from spreading.
I'd like to ask if Robert Davis could jump in and through his LIDAR and mapping assessments, if he's seen subsidence occur over the history that he's been able to look at in this project area. Subsidence occurs due to overdraw of groundwater pumping, which basically lowers the ground surface. And Alicia has indicated there has been, and it indicates that there has been occurring within the project study area or closely within the project study area.
Close to it. I haven't seen any actually in it yet, but
yeah.
Towards the north end, I know there's some just outside of it.
Okay. I haven't seen in our data collection whether that has been reported at this point, but we will be going through our data collection and research of existing even Arizona GS, other agencies that may have availability information in regards to subsidence within the project study area.
Thank you, Bob. We do have another question. Where will this presentation be available for future reference? Offline is fine. Thank you for that question. And yes, we will have this up most likely on a YouTube channel, and the link will be available at the Pima County Flood Control District website. Most likely, it might be a week, maybe 10 days. Before it's up there, but there will be a video record of this presentation and a link to that you can click onto or share with others, and we invite you and encourage you to do that. Let's go to another question, and actually it relates to the discussion previously. How will this project affect ranches and agricultural areas within the project area, those hard to reach areas? And so I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna go to Evan first, and then I'm happy to comment on that as well.
Well, and I kind of, this is we have to have on the cost benefit to agriculture. So that we need to identify projects that will benefit agriculture. But with that being said, I kind of feel like Alicia knows this stuff probably in greater detail than I do, because she works with the ranchers and the farmers.
Yes, hopefully there would not be any adverse effects to the farms or ranches, and we are going to reach out to all the farmers and ranchers in the area and ask for their input, because they may have resource concerns that we don't know about, and we definitely want to look at those. And like Evan said, we do want to focus and have some benefits towards agricultural production in the area. So we don't want anything bad happening to them based on our decisions, but no, we're definitely going to get their input and see if they can help us learn what ways we can help them.
Yes, thank you for that. And let me just also chime in. Those agricultural areas are historically hard to reach with information and getting input from. We are not only doing some high tech with social media on Facebook, Nextdoor, to reach those communities. We're also doing some low tech with distributing flyers and going out into those communities and trying to get the word out. Some of those areas are also internet challenged as well. We understand that, so we do try to give them multiple ways, both low tech and high tech ways of getting input. But it is a real challenge, especially in rural areas like this, and we will continue to solicit their input as well. Let me go to another question then. Can you comment on wildlife issues within the project area and how you're addressing those within the plan? I'll go to Evan first on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've Christina's online, and I guess she represents the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection. They've given us a lot of insight into the habitat concerns. We certainly also are aware of those through the multi-species conservation plan and the mapping that has, and the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan, which has a conservation land system. So there's certainly people in the county who understand the endangered species and wildlife issues better than I do, but it's certainly part of the framework by which we will need to evaluate whether a project is successful or not. I don't know if there's.
So the next question is kind of a thank you and just a statement, but I think the gist of it is asking just for reassurance that we are involving the Tohono O'odham Nation and the Chukstoke, if I'm saying that even close to correct, district members, so they are aware of the EA and the plan and the potential for restoration projects, and that their stakeholders are supportive, or I would say first involved and then supportive. And I would say the answer is yes. And I'll let perhaps Evan or Bob speak to that.
Thank you, Jan. This is Bob Eichinger with Stantec. We have been in email and phone call conversation with the Tohono O'odham at this point, particularly with their Cultural Resources Officer. Our intent is to reach out, and obviously they've been invited on this call, as well as our stakeholder calls, but we'll look at reaching out with them directly about the purpose and need of this project and how this project does involve their lands, and get them involved deeply in regards to issues and concerns within the watershed, particularly when it comes to their projects, their lands, and their tribal interests. So yes, we will be reaching out to them and hopefully garnering a collaborative and supporting role for the objectives of this project.
And I'd like to add to that, we did place the notification of this project and of this meeting in the Tohono O'odham Runner newspaper that gets distributed to their members. So we are trying to send a message and engage with them as well as all in the area.
Terrific. Thank you. And again, if you are here at the meeting and you would like to be a part of our outreach efforts, please leave your name and your contact information in the chat box. And that way it'll be captured for the record and added into the database. Let's go to another frequently asked question. And then I see there's another question in chat. Oh, okay, thank you. Another chat question just came in. How did this problem, and maybe this is kind of a more of an historical question, but gives us some context. How does this issue of flooding come about? Was it always this way, or was it more of a man-made issue that now needs to be corrected? And I'll throw that first to Evan, and he can toss it to members of the team.
Yeah, well, you know, the Brawley Wash historically was a wide floodplain. And their story in the Altar Valley is that it was chest-high grass, I think. And, you know, there was some human alteration, I think, that captured there was a wagon road or something up the Brawley that captured some of the flow. So there was down cutting in the Brawley, you know, even in the late actually, Robert Davis probably knows the historic better than I do, but you know, it goes way back, the down cutting in the Brawley. So that's the sort of region-wide down cutting. And then more locally, certainly choices that, you know, we have made in altering the landscape for one or another purpose. I mean, Joe was showing you the agricultural berms. There are also old canals that, you know, are no longer used. So there was a lot of, you know, landscape alteration over the years. And, you know, for a purpose, you know, as long as they were active irrigated lands, you know, they needed those canals. Today, you know, that those lands are owned by Tucson Water or Pima County, you know, the old farm berms, the old canals are no longer serving their original purpose, and we might be wise to remove them and restore the sheet flooding. So I don't know if that's fully answering any other thoughts on this. I mean, Alicia, Bob, Robert Davis. Terry's gone, otherwise you would certainly hear a lot from him. Joe?
Nothing to add here. I'd like to hear from Robert. He's done a lot of research in the watershed.
Hi, this is Robert Davis with the Quiet Creek Spatial Analysis and Remote Sensing. We're a subcontractor with Stantec. And just, I've been working in the Valley with other organizations now for several years. And what we've learned is from the late 1800s to now, there have been alterations throughout the Valley, land alterations like the berm that Joe described earlier. The numbers of these are in the thousands. You know, every agricultural field over the years has had berms put in and drainage ditches put in. So it's a significant number of changes out there, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to spot these. You know, you could go to Google Earth and look where you've got a big green area, which means that there's a channel, and then it'll hit an agricultural area, and then all of a sudden it moves to somewhere else as that area was exposed to agriculture. So these things are out there. They number in the thousands. And to what impact those have, I'm not really sure. I'm pretty good at finding them. Others are better at describing what impact those have. Thank you.
Robert, thank you for chiming in. I'd also like to ask, there's a person in chat, Christina, who had actually some very nice words for the flood control district. Christina, if you're on, would you like to make a comment?
I will just say that I very much appreciate the presentation. It's been quite professional, and I appreciate also the fact that you are really just beginning your data gathering process. Having been involved in looking at the Abra Valley and the Altar Valley for some time, just like Mary Miller and many of the others who've been involved in this process since the 90s, it's complex and it really changes and it's very unpredictable. So I appreciate this process. I very much do. And I'm looking forward to how it evolves. And I'm there if I can be of any use whatsoever. But you can always reach me through Evan. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. And I was also going to say Christina was involved in development of the county's floodplain management plan. So she's been integral to this process in a number of ways.
Well, and I just have to say that I'm very I'm a critical person. I'm not easy to get along with, generally speaking. And working with the Pima County Flood Control District has been refreshing and in some ways surprising to me. So I think this is a genuinely open process, and it needs to be. And there are a lot of people, landowners and others who have interest in this area. And it's a complicated area, but let me just tell you, it is a truly flood-prone area, and there is no greater need than that this process go forward. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Christina, thank you very much for your comments. Very much appreciated. And I'll throw this question off to anyone in the group, but I'll start with Evan. And this kind of comes off of Christina's comments. So what would be the best outcome from this process? Not only the scoping process, but also the end process. What would be the best case scenario at the very end?
So, I guess this will be my own, subjective view to some extent. There is a process by which we will seek to get cost-effective alternatives. So that part we're going to follow the process. So with that, I will go back to the floodplain management hat. And, the two things that we talk about in improved floodplain is watershed function and floodplain function. So in an ideal world for me, the watershed would infiltrate more water, grow more native plants, allow for more native wildlife, perhaps also improve the land for the hunting concerns. So that's the watershed part, and then of course for the floodplain part, and that they sort of blend to each other, right? The watershed flows to the floodplain, but that it would have similar hopes and expectations of restored floodplain function, infiltrating more water where it is possible to infiltrate more water, allow more water in the overbanks where it is possible, so that it will protect downstream interests. The stated goals of the project to reduce endangered flooding to residences, the public infrastructure, and I think we had a third one we stated, but that's kind of so that's a bit subjective, and I don't know. I would like to know if NRCS has a view on that. They're funding this process, so yeah, it'd be nice to hear them weigh in on what would be a desirable outcome.
Yeah, you already stole my thunder, Evan. But the main thing we like to see, this is me speaking on behalf of NRCS, but is, like you said, the improvement of the watershed. You know, water is precious out here, so we want to see the water stay on the land, have a chance to infiltrate, slow down, less erosion, and then, yeah, in turn, cover that soil. We don't want to be eroding our soil away in our fields and our land and the topsoil, which is hard to develop here in these desert climates. But by slowing down the water and getting better infiltration, like you said, hopefully we'll get more plant growth or reestablish plant growth on some of these barren areas so we can protect it, improve the natural habitat for the wildlife out there as well. And overall, NRCS loves to look at these large landscape scale plans, instead of picking a little project here and a little project over there. We love to look at the big picture and see overall, get more bang for our buck and see how we could address, a suite of practices and projects that could improve the overall function of the entire area and not just some disconnected projects here and there. So that would be great if we could figure out a plan that would address a large area and show more impacts than just one isolated project.
Yeah, and Evan and Alicia, I'd like to just chime in as well and support your discussion. And just from my personal aspect, and I always follow this famous quote by Dwight Eisenhower, or one of our former presidents. He said, plans are just worth the paper that they're on, but it's the planning process that adds the value to the entire process. So one of my jobs is to make sure that we adhere to the planning process, where we evaluate the concerns out on the watershed and develop reasonable alternatives that can potentially mitigate those resources, those concerns and issues out in the watershed. And then at the end of the day, develop a collaborative and sponsored and approved plan that meets these objectives of environmentally sensitive, socially acceptable, economically feasible, and just meets those objectives such that we have concurrence with potential stakeholders and funding partners down the road. So a good plan can be implemented over time. It's not that all these projects or mitigation measures that this recommended plan that we do get at the end of the day will occur overnight. It will depend on stakeholder funding, Pima County funding, NRCS funding, and application for these types of projects. They are still on a priority basis once the plan is approved. And we may identify projects that our plan may not be able to cover, but at least those plans can be potentially authorized or looked at on another type of program. So my personal objective is allow the planning process to do the planning and get the input where it needs to be inputted, and evaluate the alternatives deeply and come up with a recommended plan at the end of the day. So Phil, back to you.
Yes, thank you. And Bob or Joe, I'm wondering if you can go back to these examples of local flooding. I mean, maps are great, PowerPoint is great, but nothing really tells the story like these pictures that you showed. I know some people did come in late, and I'm wondering if you can just go through these slides quickly to show some of examples of local flooding.
Sure. This was a slide or a video that was taken by one of our colleagues up on Bop Road west of the groundwater recharge basin known as Sapstar back in 2019. This is typical of the type of shallow sheet flow and channelized flooding that you do see within our project area in response to even a small watershed rainfall event. These flood flows do carry a good amount of sedimentation and debris. They do pick up branches and bushes and shrubs. And once they recede, they deposit it on the land surface, which does cause issues in regards to having to do cleanup, looking at the issues in regards to these types of flood flows as far as erosion of banks and the tributaries contributing to the main stem of Brawley Wash. So it's very, very great that we have these on-hand videos within the watershed that show the typical flooding issues that can communicate the type of things that can occur within our study area. And these are real life examples. This one in particular just shows a pretty muddy little side tributary that carries a lot of sediment, but that sediment has to deposit somewhere and may or may not have an impact downstream, but that is yet to be seen through our basically polling our public input and through our fact finding as we continue in our data collection and research.
Bob, let me just follow up with that. So part of this study also involves field work, going out in teams and finding areas of concern. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yes, I can. Our consulting team will be going out into the field after we've collected information in regards to the resources of concern and where these areas are being identified out in the field. We'll be using the information that Robert Davis has prepared and correlating that with what we find in the field. These field visits not only look at issues in regards to flooding areas, sedimentation or erosion of the tributaries and banks, but also look at the areas that have poor vegetative cover, trying to inventory where these are located and correlating them with our aerial photos and our ground documentation so that we get a great database of these issues and concerns within the area. A number of these field visits will be more discipline oriented for invasive species or just a windshield survey of confirming cultural resources or visual aesthetics, perhaps effects of subsidence areas if we find any in this area. So a number of these are maybe confirmation of data that we've collected and to ascertain the extent of the current condition of the study area watershed.
I'm wondering if Robert can chime in here just on the difficulty of finding, mapping, and confirming areas that have issues and concern. You can see it from a map, you can see it in video when someone's fortunate enough to be around there, but I'm wondering if you can just go into some of the issues that these teams are likely to find in terms of gathering data and gathering additional input.
Sure, thanks, Phil. It is difficult. We use LiDAR extensively, and then we turn the LiDAR. LiDAR is for folks that may not know what that is, it's a system by which an airplane flies over an area and it shoots a laser down. And essentially it creates a very accurate mapping surface of the surface of the Earth, not to include the vegetation. So it's very accurate, and using that you can find areas that are lower or higher than the neighboring area that it's in. And from that, we're able to find things like a berm that was laid down that's a half a mile long, a series of them actually, just north of Highway 86 that were laid down somewhere between 1936 and 1958. And they've had roads cut through them and various other things. And these are significant berms. These are a couple of meters high, and they're still there. Other problems that we run into are, some of these berms are so big and so well built, people have turned them into roads. So you have, roads on top of berms, or roads that are acting as berms. So that's another kind of problem that we have analyzing this stuff. We do use several methods to quality check. We compare what we're looking at with aerial photos, old and new, and we'll actually go out in the field and we'll check to see if what we're saying is a berm or a ditch is in fact a berm or a ditch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. We appreciate that. And just another follow-up question. This can go to any of the teams. Just as a reminder, we have about 15 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, final questions, please feel free to use chat or raise your hand. And again, just a reminder to be part of our outreach moving forward. Please leave your name and contact information in the chat so that it will be captured for the record. And this can go to any member of the team. And if every member of the team can comment on this, going forward now after the first public meeting, what are going to be the biggest challenges going forward as far as putting the scoping plan together? And I'll start with Evan and then go to Bob and Alicia.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of our questions when we were selecting a consultant was there was a previous PEL 566 project that didn't identify cost-effective alternatives. How's this going to be different? So that remains one of my concerns. We need to find cost-effective projects that benefit agricultural communities. And I myself can envision a lot of great things we can do. I'm more concerned about the cost effectiveness side of it. And perhaps unintended consequences, that's another one. But with that, I'll pass it to Alicia.
That's pretty much one of my concerns, Evan, so I didn't have much further to add to that.
Yeah, Phil, this is Bob Eichinger. I just wanted to add that there is a tremendous amount of information that is going to be generated and collected as part of this study in our data inventory, as well as inventory of resources out in here, and really kind of identifying what the issues and concerns are out here, but also, there could be some opportunities as well, and to get public input and feedback from our public as well as the stakeholders, but then ascertaining and evaluating this amount of information and how we're going to use it to develop a number of reasonable alternatives that can mitigate the issues out here in this area. And these alternatives will be focusing in some areas, and then an alternative will focus some of the same mitigation tools in other areas. So it's going to be a good exercise in developing these alternatives that can get the biggest bang for our buck, not only for benefits concerns of the area for residences and businesses, but also from the environmental aspect as well, in minimizing any issues out here in this watershed. I know it's very environmentally sensitive. People like living out here because it's quiet and somewhat isolated. I won't say isolated, but away from the hubbub of everyday Tucson type of things. So culturally, it's a wonderful place to live. So it's basically coming up with the ideal and hopefully the ideal recommended plan that can be implemented at the end of this project.
Thank you, Bob, for that. And we have another question from Chad, and a very good one. And also follows a comment by Christina. This one comes from D. Moore. Is anyone addressing how climate change will impact these plans, especially extreme weather events, of which we seem to have more lately? And I'll toss that to Bob first, and then perhaps Evan and Alicia.
Yes, as part of our data collection, we will look at existing studies that may address climate change, not only within this watershed, within the maybe Pima County and Tucson area, and see if that impact may have on developing potential alternatives. There could be, and I'd have to get together with our concurrent study and that evaluating the issues and concerns about floodplain mapping within the Brawley Wash and Black Wash study, and look at possibly, what if scenarios if our 10-year storm event or 100-year storm event is this, if there's a percentage that it could increase over time. We may not have the time and the budget to do those types of sensitivities, but we can do a qualitative evaluation based off of experience and judgment from other similar study areas or other similar studies. So again, to the best that we can, that's available information out there, we would could possibly integrate that discussion into development of alternatives.
Evan or Alicia?
I could weigh in and just Christina knows that our county-wide floodplain management plan has some language of, we need to address future climate scenarios. So toward that aim, Eleonora, who was here earlier, has a meteorology background, and she's been involved in the process of more broadly across the county, what do we need to be worried about? And one of the things we have seen already is that the short duration, high intensity storms are increasing. So that's really more a threat to the urban core, but that's something to keep in mind. The other thing that we're worried about is, and once again, less in the Brawley, but the bighorn fire. What we've seen with the fires is that the vegetation that comes back, isn't the same one that was there before, and generally it's the warmer season vegetation moving up the mountain, which we think will cause more runoff. So, there are three parts to it. There's the part that, we need to know what the climate end is. We need to know what the watershed state is. So that's why, another concern we've identified is the long period between winter and summer rains. That's really rough on vegetation. So your reclamation study has indicated that may, in 2030 or 2060 be a longer period. So that'll feed back into less vegetative cover. So we are looking at it. I certainly wouldn't say that we would know how that would play out in the Brawley. Have a better sense of how that would play out in the urban core and how it will play out on Mount Lemmon after the fire.
Alicia, anything further to add?
Evan touched on it because my training and background is rangeland management, so on the vegetation side of things. But yes, we are seeing definitely a shift in the plant communities. Like Evan said, the warmer season plants moving uphill. And then in the very low areas, either dropping out or different species from different climate zones kind of starting to shift in. So we're definitely looking at that. trying to keep a core list of the native species that occur here naturally, trying to get those reestablished, looking at our seeding mixes for future projects and the best plants that would be acclimated to at least get established on the site and help create a foothold for the other perennial native species to come in. So we're definitely looking at that and looking at our state and transition models for our ecological sites. So we are keeping an eye on that and collecting more and more information on the vegetation that is occurring or is encroaching into these areas.
Thank you, Alicia. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to get in one final question before we wrap this up. And again, if anyone has one final question, please use the chat function, and we might be able to squeeze one more question in. We haven't talked about invasive species tonight, and I'm wondering how the plan might address some of those issues and what invasive species mean to this particular project area and how extensive it might be. I'll go to Evan first on that.
Well, and I think Christina maybe sent me this report, but you know you know, I think I sent you guys the land management study, but you know, some of the agricultural lands that were acquired by Tucson Water, there was active revegetation with, I think, Johnson grass, maybe not buffalo grass, but you know, certainly, you know, that's a concern now. We don't want the continued spread of buffalo grass and Johnson grass. And I think Alicia probably has a better idea of, you know, things that have been done in the past to address those kind of concerns.
I know Pima County, like the National Parks or Natural Parks and Rec crew, has been working on mapping, you know, the buffalo grass encroachment on a lot of their lands. They've even done a lot of spraying. And then now with Stantec, and we've got the Wilder landscape architects on, getting all tongue-tied, on board. They're going to be mapping out areas. They're going to pull a bunch of that information that Pima County and other agencies already have. So I know we're putting together a whole package of where these different species are occurring and invading and creating the list of what is happening, not just buffalo grass. Lemon love grass is prevalent. Looking at some of the other invasives, like Evan said, the Johnson grass in the old ag fields. So we'll definitely we're working on mapping that out and collecting all that information.
You know, Phil, if we have some time, Jennifer Patton's on the line. I don't know if she could jump in and say a few words, but if we're time constrained, we can go back to your social pinpoint demonstration.
Yeah, Jennifer, if you'd like to chime in, please do.
Sure. This is Jennifer with Wilder Landscape Architects. One of the things, you know, that we will be looking at, as Alicia said, is compiling data that is currently available of species that are in this area. So as part of the report, we'll have those identified as well as recommendations for treatment of those species.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to just, in the last 2 minutes that we have, I'm going to go ahead and try to request control, if I could, from this, and just go to social pinpoint one more time before we wrap it up. Make another pitch for people to use that. Can you see my screen? Hopefully you can now.
Might be a little delayed. It's not yet visible.
All right. I can't see it. Okay, let me try to regain control once more.
So while Phil is pulling that up, I just wanted to give everybody kind of a quick reminder. Really appreciate everybody's participation this evening. If you do have additional comments, we'd love to hear those. And if you want them to be a part of the summary of the scoping phase, please provide those to us before the end of April. And again, just as a reminder, the recording of this meeting will be added to the Brawley Watershed Plan website, and we anticipate that up by the end of the week.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. We do have just a couple minutes left. So again, the web address is www.brawleywashplan.com. It's just a really great tool for commenting on the area. So if you do know people who are interested in this project, who live near the project, please point them to this site. Use, as you can see, either the mapping view that's here to find your particular location, or use the satellite view. There are pull-down pins. You simply go to the project site, click on it, and make a comment. And I think any pictures or any other thing that you can attach, documents that you can attach, would be helpful to the project team. So please go on this site, go ahead and start and contribute to the discussion and the activity that's already on there. We're really looking forward to your comments. And so with that, I'm going to cede control back to Joe and the team for a final goodbye.
So if we could pull up that very final slide, just as a reminder of ways that you can contact the team, or the ways that you can provide input for it. Just as a reminder, really appreciate the participation and involvement this evening. We're feeling very positive about continuing to include more members of the public, so please spread the word. Please share these methods to those you know. We're hoping for more pins on the social pinpoint, the mapping tool, and look forward to sharing some more information with you in the future. So unless Bob or Evan, you have any parting words, I believe that concludes the content for this evening's meeting.
No, thank you, Janice. Bob Eichinger. Appreciate everybody's participation, input, great comments, the discussion, questions and answers. And Evan, do you have any final comments?
No, I just really appreciate not only the public, but a bunch of our stakeholders showed up for this. So I appreciate everybody, and certainly the team. I thought I was really happy with everybody's contribution tonight.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being with us, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.